Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with Symphonies by the Numbers. Great Symphonies by the Numbers. And we're up to Symphonies numbers 5s. Symphony number 5. 16 Symphonies numbers 5. Oh my goodness, what a great list this is going to be. I do want to make one little apology to you all, because in Symphonies numbers 4, and you know I list them all, I listed Sibelius's 4th, which had to be included in any list of great number 4s, but I skipped it when I was talking about it. And of course, every single one of you, noticed and immediately pilloried me, and I just felt so beat up afterwards and foolish. So apologies to all you Sibelians and the Sibelius people. Of course the 4th was in that list. Naturally it was in that list. It was just so austere that it somehow managed to vanish mysteriously when I was talking about it. But I'm going to try and get through all of them in this talk on fifths. And you know where it's going to start. I mean, it's got to start. We have no choice but to start with Beethoven's 5th, the most iconic 5th symphony ever written in the history of the universe. And everybody loves it, and it's wonderful, and it's terrific, and it defined what the number 5 means in symphonic terms. It really did. It's kind of amazing, isn't it? So we start with Beethoven's 5th, but it's so familiar, and we all know it, and I don't need to make a big production of it, other than to say it is the 5th, with a capital T and a capital F. So there you go. Next, number 2, Bruckner. Bruckner Symphony number 5. Oh my goodness. This is such an amazing work. I still think it's Bruckner's greatest symphony. It's the most Brucknerish of all the symphonies, the one that's most like what Bruckner could do that nobody else would ever dream of doing. And that doesn't make it his most popular. It's never going to be popular in the sense that, like the 4th was. It's very long, and it's very strange, and almost otherworldly in the way that it's structured and the way that it operates, because it's a big, long symphony. It's about 70, 75 minutes in most performances, and nothing happens in it until the last 5 minutes, as Eugen Joachim pointed out. So that doesn't mean the music isn't gorgeous or that it's not interesting. What it means is that the symphonic process is so weighted toward the great chorale at the end that it's like everything else turns out in retrospect to be an overture. And it's fascinating how Bruckner keeps it going until we get to that point. It really is. It's an amazing work. Absolutely stunning. And I love it dearly. And I know that a lot of people have, mixed feelings about it. But if you like Bruckner, once you get to know the quirkiness of Bruckner and appreciate the things that made him so unique as a composer, then the 5th is going to be your baby, because it's just so weird. It's fabulous. All right. So after Bruckner, Shostakovich Symphony number 5. That's got to be like one of the great other 5ths, iconic 5ths. It was, of course, a crucial work in Shostakovich's own output, because it was the work that rehabilitated him in the eyes of the Soviet authorities after he wrote his drastically scary opera Lady Macbeth of Mtsensk district. And it was the piece that set the mode for the rest of his symphonic output. It's also the work that defined sort of the modern mythos of Shostakovich, that is, a composer who expressed himself in code, and particularly who wrote fake triumphant endings that sound like they're positive, but they're really not, if you know what's really going on. It's a very interesting question. And actually, that whole sort of dichotomy between happy and sad, and the antithesis, and how he was trying to express tragedy in happy terms, is really a fascinating aesthetic question. It dominated his use, for example, of Jewish music in his later works, where he claimed that the Jews were so persecuted that they learned to express tragedy in dance music. That was Shostakovich, and so did he. He learned to do it in his own way, and he did it with the 5th Symphony. And if you believe that the finale is actually not a happy ending, it works both ways. That's the wonderful ambiguity of art, isn't it? And so Shostakovich's 5th is definitely a biggie. After Shostakovich, well, Number 4, Sibelius. There, I remembered Sibelius. I put him closer to the top so I wouldn't lose track of him as we got deeper down into the list. Sibelius's Fifth is, of course, the major masterwork after his Second Symphony, which, in terms of popularity and also in terms of sort of heroic sentiment. I mean, it's a piece that ends in optimism and victory, although the ending is a little equivocal. It's that strange ending with those, chords with the long pauses between them. But still, it also has a wonderful finale that does what the finale of the Second Symphony should have done, but didn't, because it did it once too many times. Now, some of you took issue with the fact that I said that the finale of the Second Symphony comes around once too many times. It only comes around once with the Fifth. I mean, it really gets it. The next time it comes around, it's the end. So that's wonderful. We don't have to go through the whole process before we get to the end like you do in the Second Symphony. But that's a matter of personal taste. And of course, a great performance conceals many faults. It's true in the Second. It's not so true in the Fifth. So the Fifth has no faults. It's a very concise work. Conductors blow it fairly regularly, actually, but, because it requires tremendous control of tempo and time. And that's something some composers have, that sense of timing, or conductors, that is, and some conductors do not. And it doesn't stop them from massacring Sibelius's Fifth. But when it's done well, it's just unbelievably thrilling. So after Sibelius, Nielsen. We're staying in Scandinavia. We've done Nielsen 3, 4, 5. So these are the meat, these 3 symphonies of Nielsen's symphonic output. He did write 6 symphonies, as you know. Number 5 is one of the greatest symphonies of the 20th century. It's an extraordinary piece. It really is. It's one that has, it has such rugged honesty of expression. It's so clear what's happening, even though there's no program, particularly in the first movement, where you have music of stasis, music of thoughtful progress and forward movement, and then you have evil. Evil is the clarinet going like that, and the snare drum going whap, and then there's the climax where everything gets mixed up in this giant imbroglio, moving at this slow tempo as the noble progressive idea tries to get over the hump. And to keep it behind the hump, Nielsen tells the snare drummer to improvise crazily as though he wants to stop the progress of the orchestra. And so, how insane the snare drummer goes is one of the things that all of us Nielsenians listen for when we listen to the Fifth Symphony, because you really can't be crazy enough. You can't. And some conductors really just have very tame snare drummers, and that's a terrible, terrible thing. And then after the whole thing just sort of self-destructs and ends in exhaustion, Nielsen reconstitutes life to a glorious, triumphant ending in the second movement, which is not without its paths wrongly taken as well. It's just an amazing piece. 2 movements in totally original, organic form. It's, if you don't know it, you're really missing something major. And if you don't like it, you have to keep listening to it until you love it. It's the only way. It's worth it, believe me. Fabulous piece. Next, Prokofiev Symphony No. 5, another great Fifth. Maybe the influence of Beethoven's Fifth on these composers bestirred them to do great work in Symphonies Numbers 5. I don't know if that's the actual reason, but it certainly works. Prokofiev's Fifth is one of his 2 really greatest symphonies, the other being No. 6. And, it's wonderful. And it has so many bad performances. I've talked about this many, many times. It's another symphony that seems to give people a lot of trouble. And the trouble is of the most obvious kind. It's simply making audible what Prokofiev so clearly wrote, like fortissimo tam-tam crashes and things like that. But it's a tremendous work. Great fun and glorious when it's done well, as it so seldom is. So after Prokofiev, I have to bring up Einar Englund. Englund, who I've mentioned before. He's one of the great post-Sibelian Finnish symphonists. And his Fifth Symphony, it has a subtitle, Fennica, which is, the finish or whatever, what doesn't mean anything. It doesn't matter. But it's a single movement work inspired somewhat by the example of Sibelius' Seventh. I was going to say Beethoven No. Sibelius' Seventh, which is also in one movement, it doesn't sound anything like Sibelius. Englund had a very personal style. It was closer to the Russians, Shostakovich and Prokofiev, but then, it veered off into wonderfully personal directions. His music is tonal, but full of contemporaneity. I don't know what else you would call it. It's modern music, but very, very listenable modern music and rewarding modern music. It really feels good to listen to it because it's so organically conceived and wonderfully put together. A brilliant work, and you really ought to get to know it. It's on the same disc with The Great Wall of China and the Fourth Symphony, all of which are fabulous. It's all on Ondine on one CD. So get them all on one disc. You'll be very happy. I'm happy to talk about everything on that disc because it's all great. So give Englund a shot. He's really a good composer. A very, very good composer. Then Vaughan-Williams, Symphony No. 5. Every time I leave out Vaughan-Williams, you all jump up and down and scream and yell at me. So he will show up a little more often, maybe, not because of the pressure, but because the music is good. The Fifth Symphony is a remarkable work, actually, a piece of unbelievable euphonious spirituality, if you want to call it that. I actually find it almost too beautiful in places. It's so attractive that it almost puts you to sleep. I don't mean it's boring, puts you to sleep. It puts your mind at ease, which inures you to the more sort of the darker undercurrents, because it does have them. And the concluding movement of Passacaglia is just gorgeous. It's all gorgeous. The slow movement, the Romance, is based on music from his opera, The Pilgrim's Progress. And so the spiritual connection is very clear, but you can hear it in a minute. It's just such a beautiful, beautiful piece, scored for a small orchestra. Just a couple trombones, a couple horns, a couple trumpets, double winds, and strings. It doesn't have anything exotic, but the whole piece sounds exotic. It sounds like it's coming from another world. And it was fascinating after the fourth, which is, Godzilla Eats Bristol, as, I pointed out in my last little chat, a very violent and nasty piece of monster music. And then you get this. And everybody thought at the time, since Vaughan-Williams was like 175 when he wrote it, that this was going to be an old man's valedictory statement as the universe opened up. Little did they know he had 4 more symphonies ahead of him, one of them even meaner than the fourth. Pretty cool, huh? But the fifth is, just appallingly great, and it had to make any short list. So we're almost halfway, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes, we are halfway. And we begin the second half with Tchaikovsky, Symphony No. 5. Da 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 dum ba. Da 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 dum ba. Da 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 dum ba da. All right, I'll stop there. I'll spare you. Who could forget that one? And the second movement, oh my God. Ya da da da. Ya da 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 da. Oh God, it's gorgeous. It's so beautiful. Tchaikovsky himself had issues with it. He thought that the finale didn't work. It actually doesn't, but we don't care because it's so beautiful. And he there were cuts made. And some performances that are out there still do the cut. Older performances, modern conductors wouldn't dare. Frankly, it's like a minute of music anyway. What difference does it make? But, they chop it up to try and somehow get rid of the dead spot, because the finale does have a big dead spot. Sorry, it's a dead spot. But like I said, it's pretty. Nobody makes it, what difference does it make, right? Tchaikovsky hated everything he wrote anyway, but boy, the fifth is beautiful. Holy mackerel. So after Tchaikovsky's fifth, we have Kalliwoda's Symphony No. 5. Johann Wenzel Kalliwoda. Kalliwoda was a seriously fine symphonist. Czech symphonist. He was very, very popular in in the first half of the 19th century. Schumann wrote very, very positively about him, and then filched the theme of the scherzo of Kalliwoda's First Symphony for Schumann's own fourth. The Kalliwoda first came out in the 1820s. It was still, Beethoven was still around. And it's a wonderful personal work. And he was one of those composers who began to, write in a more nationalist way. That is, he was inspired by Czech folk melody and whatnot. And so you can tell. But the fifth has some of the most wonderful tunes. I mean, the finale is da 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 bum 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 ba dum ba dum da da. But the best is the slow movement. The slow movement sounds like almost a little Tchaikovsky ballet-ish. It's marked, con delicatezza or something like that, with extreme delicatezza, let me tell you. And it has a wonderful little pizzicato accompaniment. And then the cellos swoop in with the tune. Ya da 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 da. Oh, it's just wonderful. It has humor and warmth all at the same time. It's just a fantastic piece, and you really need to hear it. It's been recorded twice. There's one on Orfeo that's quite good, and there's one on CPO, on Period Instruments, which is really, really good. Absolutely fabulous. And I've talked about them before, and I think I've played samples, and I've done videos, and, I push Kalliwoda. He's a fine composer who deserves vastly more attention than he gets. His string quartets are great, too, by the way. And I've done a talk on them. You can listen to a bit of them. They are really cool. So after Kalliwoda, Mahler. You remember him. We have to do Mahler. Isn't it fun that Mahler's fifth begins with the same rhythm as Beethoven's fifth? Well, Mahler's a triplet, but it's the same motive, right? Da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum. Of course, Mahler's goes up instead of Beethoven's goes down. But it's kind of like throwing down the gauntlet and saying, here, I can do fifth symphonies too. And he can, and he does, which still doesn't mean that it's not the Mahler symphony that gets the most bad performances. It's a ferociously difficult work to play. It's very, very difficult for the strings. It's the longest Mahler symphony, not in time, not in duration, 70 minutes or so, but in bar numbers, which really tells you something. That means it's going to be tiring. That means it's fast, because it's got the most bar numbers in a shorter period of time. That means you pack more of them into the same space, which means you play them more quickly. And that's the scherzo. Somebody who writes an 18-minute scherzo in 3/4 time, holy mackerel, that is a bear. And Mahler himself said, no one is going to get it. No one's going to get this symphony. They're just not going to figure it out until 100 years after I've died. Well, they're playing it more, but they still haven't figured it out, as often as not. It's really in a remarkable work, because there really is no other symphonic work of that size and importance and magnitude and depth of expression whose major movement is a scherzo, a giant central scherzo. It's an extraordinary piece formally, and we don't think about that most of the time. We just say, oh, it's Mahler's fifth, and we just listen to it. But no, my friends, it has some amazing formal characteristics that are well worth considering. And it also has the adagietto, which everybody loves. It's very pretty. But, not the least of which is that there are two outer movements on each side of the scherzo. There's a pair of movements that are related. They're played basically attacca, and they have thematic interconnections. But the scherzo is the meat of it. And oh, what a fascinating symphony it is, especially when it's done right. Which happens, I can count on the fingers of one hand. So there you go. After that, well, let's see. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to go, I guess. George Lloyd, who cannot be promoted vigorously enough. The British composer, a wonderful, wonderful composer who wrote in a completely traditional style, somewhat based on Berlioz meets Tchaikovsky but also, again, it sounds contemporary. You would never mistake him for somebody who was writing in the 19th century. it just doesn't sound like that. It has too many modern turns of phrase, but the music is wonderful and it's romantic and beautifully scored. And the Fifth Symphony was the one that first sort of blew me away. And, I arranged and played in the North American premiere. So that was great fun. And it opens, it has 5 movements. It opens with a pastoral. And the pastoral is ya da 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 ya da 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 ba ba. Oh, you can sing the whole symphony. Lloyd's father was an Italian opera freak. And so, Lloyd learned to compose music which was vocal, that sings, even when it's purely instrumental. He took after his dad in that respect. And, there are just so many beautiful moments. That fabulous cantilena in the slow movement. Ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da. You can't, what can I tell you? It's just great music. Listen to it and go away humming. You will. You really will. Then, after Lloyd, back to Scandinavia. Tubin! Tubin's Fifth Symphony. Oh, this is wonderful. Some of you mentioned the fourth of Tubin, which I agree is gorgeous. He subtitled it, I think, Lyrica or something like that. It's full of great tunes, especially the finale. Da 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 da. It's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. The problem is there are only 2 recordings of it. The one on Alba is excellent. It's very, very good with Estonian forces. The one on Bis as part of the Tubin cycle was the live one. I think it's with the Bergen Philharmonic with Järvi. And it was badly recorded live and rather sloppily played. And it's just a shame because, I didn't include it because I wasn't too sure about availability. I know the Alba stuff is around. It's out there. You can get Alba. And if you can and you want Tubin's fourth, get that one. But for the fifth, we're back on Bis with Järvi. It's an exciting, exciting symphony. It's got a couple pairs of timpani that pound away, which a la Nielsen fourth in places, which really makes it fun. It's an energetic and vibrant symphony that really deserves plenty of play. And Paavo Järvi did it for Telarc in Cincinnati. I think it was coupled with like the Nielsen fifth or something like that. But it was a wonderful Sibelius too. It was a wonderful performance as well. It's a work that deserves to be in the repertoire, no question about it. And so does, ironically, Dvořák's fifth, which nobody plays. Very seldom. It gets hauled out once in a while. It's the first of the great, sort of mature Dvořák symphonies. Remember, Dvořák's first 5 were all written before Brahms's first. And Dvořák's fifth is just astonishing, considering, where it came from and what it is. Because Dvořák's move toward a more classicizing idiom in symphonic expression was entirely innerly motivated. It came from his study of Beethoven, and just as it did with Brahms. And his fifth was, I'm absolutely convinced that I wrote a paper about it. The paper got published and peer-reviewed and all that stuff. The fifth was the inspiration for Brahms' third. They're both in F major. They have so many similar features. Not that Brahms isn't himself and very individual. He is. And Dvořák is himself and very individual. But as a work of purely symphonic thought in terms of its integration of motives and its handling of thematic development and what Schoenberg's called Brahms's work, developing variation. Dvořák's fifth is a major, major milestone in the history of music. So there's that. Then we've got Holmboe, back to Scandinavia. Holmboe Symphony No. 5, one of his great symphonies as well. Actually, by the time Holmboe got to the fifth, he was sort of in the happy middle. He wrote like 14 or 13 symphonies. So those composers who got past like 9 or 10 or 8 or 9, when they got into their middle periods, they were really like firing on all cylinders. It was true of Dvořák, it was true of Mahler, it's definitely true of Holmboe. His middle period stuff is really good. It's really, really good. And the fifth is a great piece of music. it has another piece that's almost like Tubin, like a lot of these Scandinavian composers, the Scandinavian neoclassicists or quasi-neoclassicists, Sibelius, Nielsen, they were all in the same in the same group. They didn't sound the same, of course, but they were the same aesthetically. In other words, they were out to create or revivify the idea of the classical, that again, organic is the best word, the naturally, wonderfully related orchestral, abstract, symphonic thought thing. That's what they were doing. And they did it with idioms that were highly rhythmic and vital and full of sort of a refreshing take on tonality. And Holmboe was right there with them. He's right up with them in that crew. And the fifth is one of his great statements. It really deserves, again, to be a repertory piece. I mean, we don't hear these pieces, and it makes me crazy. It's so evil and unfair. We have so much opportunity to expand our horizons with more music and to try and explain to people that classical music isn't dead, that there's still great stuff out there, that it's worth exploring, that it's fun to explore and discover. I mean, all these things that you could do with it instead of just sitting there like a dead person going like, right? You know what I'm talking about. So after Holmboe, we come to number 16, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Yes! And I haven't left any out. Number 16 is Malcolm Arnold. I know this is going to come as a shock to some of you. I think Malcolm Arnold is definitely one of the great 20th century symphonists. He's an extraordinary composer with a totally personal idiom. And the fifth is, in so many ways, I think, a sort of summation of everything that makes Arnold Arnoldian. It really is. It's got supermarket shopping music or elevator music. It's got sentimental tunes. It's got a fife and drum corps in the finale. Oh, it's wonderful. And it's got incredibly modern sounding dissonant music next to beautiful second subjects on the harp and celesta. And it's in cyclical form. And I mean, come on. I don't know how anyone could listen to it and not understand that there is a real symphonic genius behind that music. And it sounds like nobody else. Arnold's scoring is so marvelous. You know, I have the score of the fifth and a couple other things he did. He writes for a very normal orchestra, basically double winds, you know, a couple of trumpets, normal brass. He doesn't do anything crazy, but he isolates each element of the orchestra and gives them solo work to do, including the harp and the celesta and the percussion section and the brass, particularly because he was a trumpeter, and the winds. And so he doesn't blend colors like, you know, the late romantics did. He's much more Mahlerian in that he wants each orchestral section to have its own distinct personality, and he often gives them their own distinct music to play. So that makes, you know, the whole thing, you know, really full of personality and character. And then when things do come together, they're always rather shocking because he can make just an enormous sound, but in the simplest way. I love looking at his scores. They're an absolute clinic in efficiency and accuracy and, you know, expressive point. He just goes right for it. He knows exactly what he wants and exactly how to get it. And his effects never fail. Never. It's marvelous stuff. So Arnold, Symphony No. 5 is my fifth. And with that, we have come to the end of 16 fabulous fifths. Feel free to toss in your own, to add a few of your own, because I know I've left out a batch, but that's only so you have something to tell me. And I'm here waiting, but like when you do tell me, and I've said this a few times, say something about the music. I noticed that a couple of you have started to do that because I've been deleting everything you post. When you don't say something about the music, say something about the music. Tell us why we should be listening to it and what it means to you, what you like about it. I don't mean you have to write, you know, an essay or Eliot's The Wasteland or something like that, but a couple of lines about what makes it wonderful. It would really be nice. I mean, there were some really major works that I left out that I really, really wanted to put in here. I mean, there was Bach's, there was Tornemir, There's, I wish I had room for everyone. But I think this list of 16 will give you some familiar and less familiar stuff to sink your teeth into. It's all great music. And then we'll take the entire discussion and send it off into the universe for posterity. The great symphonies of humankind. Be there. Aloha. And keep on listening. Bye-bye.